was a lot of fun and I feel like was very productive. And so we all felt that it would be very useful to have another one in light of the Title VI plan that we will be talking about. So thank you everybody very much for your time. I guess, Janice, for the roll call.
All right, there's we started. Recording progress. How bad, Mr. Chambers? Somebody needs to meet. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Present.
Mr. Root. Charles City County, Mr. Walton. Chesterfield County Chair Davy.
Here.
Mr. Petrosky.
Here.
Reply mail. Mr. Rickwan. Mr. Schneider.
Here.
I'm sorry, who responded?
I apologize. Next one.
Oh, I gotcha. Mr. Ida.
Here. Sorry.
Jessica, your voice changed. Ms. Galen. Richland County, Mr. Basham. Mr. Cosby. Hanover County, Mr. Ledbetter.
Here.
Mr. Waddell.
Present.
Henrico County, Mr. Dixon. Mr. Bass. Mr. Weed.
Here.
Newcastle County, Ms. Guthrie. Here. Mr. Hathaway.
He's online.
All right. City of Richmond, Chair Bond.
Here.
Ms. Erickson. Here. Mr. George.
Present virtually.
Thank you. Mr. Brackman. Mr. Smith. Chamber RBA, Mr. Easter. Richmond Equitable Transit and Mobility, Ms. Rowan. Mr. Moore. League of Women Voters, Ms. Weisiger. Here. Ms. Rosenblum. NAACP, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Willis. RABA, Mr. Burnley. Mr. Hamilton.
Present virtually.
Sorry. Thank you.
John Hamilton's present virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. RVA Rapid Transit, Ms. Walker. Ms. Power. Here. Band Center, Mr. Williams.
Here.
VCU, Mr. Leonard.
Here.
Mr. Cole.
Here.
VCN, Ms. Higgins. Mr. Hankins. And Virginians for High Speed Rail, Mr. Chesterman. That concludes the roll call for attendance. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, is there any consideration of amendments to the agenda? Seeing none of those, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
And a second. Ready? Voice vote, all in favor? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. All right. One day I'll get it all the way through. Without getting completely. Public comments section. Are you, Janice, are you aware of anybody online for public comments?
Yeah, we have no.
Okay.
Questions to address the brief.
Great. And I see some folks on the back. Is anybody here for public comments to make public comment? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Great. Then moving forward, CTAC and so the chair reports both. I have no chair report other than what Martha's going to share events, which I think is very exciting. The work that we've done on the WG is, I think, excellent, and I'm very excited to see what the larger group has to say about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No comments either.
Fantastic.
Martha as well.
All right, well, then we can move forward to section 1.
Yeah, I'll take, if it's okay, a liberty to say two things before I dive into Title VI. One, I just want to say thanks to everybody for agreeing to, well, by coming, I think you're agreeing with this joint meeting concept. when our team looked at the agendas and we saw that there was so much overlap in content between the two, and then also recognizing kind of the richness of conversation that can come from the larger group being together, we felt like, and after conferring with both of the chairs, we felt like it was a smart move to be able to have the combined meeting again. So we appreciate that and hope that it'll continue to foster that kind of connectedness between the two committees. Chair Biden had mentioned the equity work group has been continuing to work past your last meeting. I'll just give you an update. The draft attendance and compensation policy that was reviewed by this joint committee is on the schedule for the May 27th policy board meeting. So just due to timing of meetings, this joint committee is meeting again before the policy board will review that for action. So we'll be able to update you on the decision that's made at the policy board meeting later this month. But just to let you know that recommendation is planned on that agenda for that meeting. You weren't here at the last meeting. The joint convening of the CTAC and the Public Outreach and Engagement Committee met and reviewed the equity work group's recommendations to adopt an attendance policy for the CTAC, as well as a compensation policy that would afford members of the CTAC through a pilot program opportunity to receive a stipend for attendance at the CTAC meetings. The hope is that can, number one, help us to be a lever to engage membership of the CTAC and make it in some cases a little bit less of a barrier for people to be active members of that committee. But also as a pilot, it's an opportunity for us to evaluate whether that's a program that we can extend to other types of convenings and other types of committees. All of you, we recognize our volunteers in some way, shape, or form, and we're grateful if you are here by virtue of your employer and representing that employer. We're grateful for the time that your employer grants you to do. And then we know that many of you are actually here of your own interest in the subject matter. And we really appreciate the fact that you give your personal time and travel to be able to come to these meetings. And we know that providing lunch is a piece of the enticement, but maybe the stipend also is a recognition of the expertise that you bring to the room. So we appreciate that. Mr. Waddell.
Thank you for stealing my thunder. I was going to say the same thing.
Oh.
One of the attractiveness of this is the discourse. I learn a lot. I'm a volunteer. The value to me exceeds the quote unquote inconvenience. I heartily approve of the combination of the two committees. It's effective. And also I greatly appreciate the timing of it. Middle of the day is a little bit easier for me with my schedule. So thank you very much. And I will try to keep my comments short.
Yeah, I want to come back to some of those comments when we get to 3, because we want to be able to talk with this group about the most effective ways to think about meeting structure and planning and how we approach our engagement with you all. So I appreciate the open door there. So.
And the carrot and stick sort of thing, the luncheon, figuratively and literally, I appreciate that greatly. As a single guy, this is probably the best I've eaten in a week.
I don't know how to respond to that. So. I'm glad we could help your confidence. So just, I think just laying a little bit of groundwork. I know that this group doesn't get together that often. So if I'm saying things that feel repetitive, just wave your hand and say, yeah, I get it, Martha. But for the benefit of those who may not be aware, the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization bylaws have a provision that address the formation of what's called in the bylaws an equity working group. It's intended to be a working group, a subgroup of the CTAC. And so that group had not formed or met as a subcommittee for some time. And so in fiscal year 2025, the year that we're in right now, we asked the CTAC if there was a desire or interest to activate that working group. In that discussion last fall, I think the consensus of the CTAC was that if there's not really a role for the working group to play, then it doesn't make sense to schedule more meetings and have a group come together. We looked at our work program and came back and said, well, we do have some things that we could address as a committee of a whole, or perhaps this could be a set of tasks for the working group, and it was agreed that it made sense for a working group to form specifically to make those recommendations for the attendance and the compensation policy. And then the second task was to review and support staff in its review and recommendations around updating our Title VI plan. And so the equity work group met on April 25th. I did, I think, probably more thorough or detailed of a presentation about the Title VI plan than I will do today, I promise. I won't go that long, but we talked through the content of why we have a Title VI plan. In short, any recipient of federal funding is subject to compliance with Title VI of the United States Civil Rights Act as amended in 1964. That's universal of any recipient of federal funding. And we have developed a Title VI plan to ensure our compliance with that. And I will say related provisions related to the Americans with Disabilities Act, provisions related to treatment of persons that have limited English proficiency, and how we engage with disadvantaged businesses. So I went through a pretty extensive training deck with the equity work group members to kind of talk through the whys and whats of Title VI. Essentially, kind of to boil it down for this group and not to be too repetitive, this is a required document to ensure our compliance again with the United States Civil Rights Act. And it applies primarily to three kind of core activities of the commission and the TPO. And those are public engagement, employee recruitment, and vendor contracting. And so, as I mentioned, there's a very strong relationship with ADA compliance, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then various other executive orders that have been issued over decades, again, related to disadvantaged businesses, English proficiency, and whatnot. So we completed at the staff level a desk review for compliance. We submitted a package. It's a self-evaluation of our compliance under Title VI. It's a worksheet form that we fill out and we submit to VDOT, the Virginia's Department of Transportation, every 3 years. We submitted that package on May 9th, and we're now in the, I'll say, waiting period to hear back from VDOT about our compliance. They were specifically reviewing our activities from October 1 of 2024 to October 1 of 2021 through September 30th of 2024. So it's a 3-year review. And again, we're awaiting the response and any recommendations or findings VDOT might have from that review. That information I think will be very useful as we move forward with the equity work group to make any edits or amendments to the plan and adopt any changes to our internal practices. Our staff has also done a review of the Title VI plan, and that draft, I should mention, the plan is included in your packet that everybody has access to. Our staff have done a review as well. We've identified some edits that need to be made. Things as basic as making sure that the address has been updated since our move a couple of years ago, and just really refreshing many of the practices that we have to ensure that people who need accommodations for meetings and things like that are still in place. Making sure that all of the links on our website, access the right places and all those kinds of things. So our staff has completed a review of that, and actually Ken and Kristen have put together, I think, jointly a red line version that we're reviewing and will be available to the equity work group when it next meets. And I think Kristen also initiated the use of augmented intelligence, AI tool, to be able to take a look at the executive orders that have been issued in 2025 and those that have been rescinded, to be able to cross-reference. As you can imagine, I think we're up to several hundred executive orders, or in the hundreds of executive orders that have been issued. And so we wanted to be able to have kind of a rational way to take a look at that and identify what content might need to be updated. So all of those things are underway right now, and the equity work group is scheduled to meet again on May 30th. So I think what I wanted to do is just give everybody a little bit of a lay of the land of where we are in this process, how the equity work group will be engaged. I think it's fair to make an invitation to anybody who's particularly interested in this part of the equity work group's agenda, that work group can certainly absorb more folks if interested. Also, if it feels like you're not so interested in this particular topic, we can understand. And so we wanted to kind of take this opportunity to extend an invitation to folks if they want to evaluate whether or not they'd like to continue serving on the equity work group. After the May 30th meeting, we'll assess and figure out what the schedule will be going forward. But our target is to bring that draft Title VI plan back to the CTAC and the Public Outreach and Engagement Committee, who would then make recommendations respectively to the policy board and the regional commission, as both bodies need to update the Title VI plan amendments. Does that all kind of process wise make sense?
What time on May 30th?
The group has been meeting at the lunchtime hour. So I think unless there was a conflict with
I
somebody,
believe that.
You're right, it was
It's gonna be more virtual.
I apologize. I think it was gonna be in the morning and virtual. Yeah.
Morning
I forgot.
and virtual.
Yes,
Thank you.
apologies. Yeah, we have a conflict at the lunch hour on that day in this room, and so is 9:30 the right time?
I can't remember. We haven't actually put it on the calendar yet.
Okay.
But we were thinking we use 9:30 or 10.
Sorry about that.
I like virtual.
Are there any other kind of questions, or since we did have a more robust conversation with the equity work group, anybody wanna, I mean, I went pretty extensively into some of the things that we're thinking about as we're navigating changes from federal directives, but happy to have others talk if they want to.
Thanks for the executive summary. You hit all the high points that I wanted to ask, except one.
Okay.
You mentioned the self-audit every 3 years, and VDOT kind of reviews that.
Mhm.
Is there any other audits at the federal level?
Yeah, thank you. The state review is timed to be in advance, typically about 6 months in advance of our federal certification review that is conducted by our federal agency partners, Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration. So we are gearing for federal recertification, which is on a triennial cycle. For that to kick off in the fall of 2025. And so the VDOT review is typically expected to happen this time of year in advance of that.
At the risk of asking too many questions, how detailed is the audit? And how much time does it take y'all to justify, so to speak?
It's a 2.5-page worksheet, answering questions. The questions again focus on what we've done from a public engagement perspective, what we've done from an employment perspective and a contracting perspective. So there are a number of questions about when was the last time your Title VI plan was updated? Is it publicly accessible? So we document that by providing the link on our website of where it can be downloaded. The question, I should have brought the form in with me, but it includes a question about the demographics of our staff. We submit documentation of our inclusion of Title VI assurances that are provided as part of our contract documents. They ask for a list of the vendors that we've engaged with over the course of the last 3 years and the contract dollar amounts and a copy of a sample of those contracts. So that's the type of things, I mean, they give a month to complete the self-assessment and submit it. I mean, I certainly didn't take a month to package it, but you know, it's a handful of staff members working to help compile various parts of it. So, you know, we probably worked on it intermittently over the course of about 2 weeks to compile the information.
Thank you.
And I will say, my experience with the state Title VI review and the federal certification, but even more so with the state Title VI, it's approached as a technical assistance effort. And so while they are evaluating us from a compliance perspective, the process is very much in the kind of spirit of how do we work with you to attain and maintain compliance. So we have a good working relationship with the Title VI division at VDOT. And while they are required to evaluate us, we have regular interactions with them about how we can improve our purpose.
I applaud that. Thank you.
Quick question, the focus of this is being in compliance with the law,
Yes.
and that's great, it's important. I'm curious, where are the elements of sort of measuring whether we're like reaching the right populations? Is that like the public engagement plan and tracking of shows up at events? Is that kind of how we, aside from the auditing, like how do we know that we're not missing a population of access to information in a day-to-day?
Yeah, so I'll say two things and I'll also defer to Holly and Kristen, who spend a lot of time thinking about that question, and answering it. I really view the Title VI plan as our commitment to meet the conditions of the law. And so I don't want to say that that's the minimum standard, but I mean, we draft the Title VI plan to say, this is what we are required to do and are committed to doing. I think where the public engagement plan comes in is how do we meet not just the letter of the law, but the intent behind it and the spirit of it. And so, at Plan RVA, we believe that planning is best when it's as inclusive as possible of all the people in the community. And the investments that we've been able to make in hiring this amazing staff, really, I think are helping us to be able to figure out how do we reach those communities across the region that we don't have current relationships with and access to. So do you want to say any more about things you think about when Mr. Shavers asked that question?
It's so big, I'm not sure. Gosh. I mean,
So data, I think, is a big driver. It's difficult to, I think, sometimes measure movement from a place of where you have been in a community to where you are when you're also thinking regionally. So we sort of zoom in to look at what is the makeup, let's say, of a locality where we're trying to make sure we're reaching as many diverse voices who exist in that community. For example, if we look at Charles City, we overlay that with Chesterfield County, that's going to be very different. So we're taking a look at how we advance relationships and with different groups based on the makeup of the locality, and then zooming out to say, so what does that look like as a whole? It's definitely a challenge to be in all the places with all of the people at all, as much as possible, but to know that we're looking at the data and then leaning into places where we see that that's, a gap, is part of how we're measuring, did that effort of going in the community maybe multiple times result in additional responses to a public engagement. Of course, we have those across programming. So it's definitely a lot of balls in the air, but there is a baseline of, who are these communities that we are not seeing that exist in our region? And what are we doing and what are some of the barriers that we might need to work on? So some of that is longer term.
Yeah. Well, and I would add that you all are helping us do this too, right? Like, we can't do this work alone. Having people who care about this work and your localities and the organizations that you represent, you're helping us amplify that. And this is why I feel like bringing these committees together is also important to find out, where do we overlap? Where do we have shared communities? Who's missing even in our own committees is a conversation we've been having for a while with CTAC even. So I think like continuing that conversation of acknowledging where we have influence, where people are missing at the table, you're helping us do that. So I feel like I want your good brains on this too.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Am I correct in understanding that section 4 of the Title VI plan is basically all about collecting that kind of data? And
Yeah, it's what drives the data collection part.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I just had a question about talking about the data. Are you, you're using the 2017 data?
Tell me more about where.
This plan is the previous plan that
That's the
built.
previous plan that you're redoing.
We're
now?
updating,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'd be looking at 20.
Good catch.
Yeah.
Right, so the work of the committee will be to review this plan. The product will be, whatever month, 2025, and it will be informed by the most current data across the region of those targeted populations. In accordance with our new priorities as provided by the federal agencies.
Well, thank you. In following up with that question, I caught the 2021, bless you, didn't catch the 2017. The demographics in there are 2017 or 2021, or what's the time frame of the population demographics?
I think they're
17. I didn't get, thank you. When might there be something fresher?
We'll update it with the front.
Oh, it'll
Might
be,
not be understanding your question.
I wasn't clear in the question. All data is, how fresh will the data be? Will it be from the 2020 census, or will it be
It'll
something?
be, baseline will be 2020 census, but then where there are estimates based on like the American Community Survey or other types of data sources that we have access to, we'll be able to update from 2020. So like 17 data would have been from 2010 actually, but then updated to, you don't wait 10 years.
Thank you. I look forward to that. I like numbers and summary of what the populations are. It gives me focus comparison. Thank you.
ACS is annual, so I would assume that at least some 2024 data.
Yeah, there's like a timing issue when it gets released, numbers crunching them, but yeah.
Last 2 years.
Yeah.
I actually had a question, because there's so many different demographic considerations in here. Is there thought to creating a sort of index of those various demographic intersections of like a vulnerability index, like a population vulnerability index for like how to combine that information into a clear guideline for which communities are the most in need of outreach or at risk of not being reached or having their needs met? Is that something that's been considered?
I'm pushing out of my bounds of expertise, but one of the things that we find ourselves in right now is that prior to the start of calendar year 2025, there were resources similar to what you're describing in things like Justice 40 and the definition of what we call EJ communities. And so we did have some data that helped support that type of indexing. The Justice 40 initiative has been delisted as a resource that we are supposed to be using under our federal guidelines, and the regulations and executive orders around how we consider environmental justice have also been modified. And so we are finding our way together in our community of other MPOs and planning district commissions to determine whether there are other ways to kind of think about that type of indexing that you're talking about. I don't know if you were feeding me that question because you knew that answer or you were curious, but
just genuinely curious, yeah.
Secretary Duffy, the United States Transportation Secretary, has issued some memoranda that start to outline community characteristics that the United States Department of Transportation will be investing in and future program priorities and things like that. We're digesting that and trying to figure out how to overlay those types of demographic characteristics and what that means. Elizabeth on our staff, who's not in the room right now, has really been doing a lot of that mapping to kind of see what our mapping of, again, what we call EJ communities and the Justice 40 geographies, and then how that looks relative to the newer released priorities. So I think we've got ingredients to go where you're asking. I don't know if we're gonna have that fully baked, quite frankly, by the time we want to update the Title VI plan. And so it may be that the Title VI plan will need to be updated more regularly than every 3 years, just as we navigate kind of the new regulatory environment.
Good answer.
Very interesting and helpful.
But if I may just return to that idea of really looking at the demographic and other types of makeup of the localities we are serving, as a guide for the way that we are engaging in that locality when there are not maybe more regional events, but locality specific. I think it needs to be a guide. You know, we're not applying the same strategy to every location. I think that's potentially a great way to think about serving the people who make up our region. Not overlaying a strategy onto the region that might apply anywhere else. So.
Any other questions? Yes, we can, I guess, not move on, still you, but
Yeah.
move on to the next topic.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to do this hopefully briefly enough to give the committee time for Kristen to lead us through this activity, but it's the time of year when we're planning for next fiscal year and so can you cue up the slide deck? I opened myself, the large amount of new information that is coming has been admitted, I will admit to the group, has been a little overwhelming. And so I think that our staff are doing a really great job of navigating the new information and kind of, I think, doing a great job of processing what really does need to change and how we've been operating as a regional planning organization and what actually holds true. And so I want to kind of call back to just what Kristen said. I mean, the reality is that much of the new planning guidance that we've gotten doesn't change fundamentally who's in this region, who we are here to serve, and how we endeavor to think about the future of our region for the benefit of those who are here and who we expect to be here in the future. So I wanted to open this slide deck, maybe giving most of you a little bit of a reminder about where this agency has been over the last year and leveraging a years-long investment in multi-years long investment in our scenario planning tool to evaluate, where we are today and what those opportunities are to envision multiple versions of the future. And how we can really think about those drivers of change to be for the good of the most people in the community, as opposed to, where we lack planning, things happen and we find places maybe we didn't want to be, and where we perhaps overly planned for a certain point in the future, we may not have anticipated certain what we call disruptors. COVID is a great example of that. When you think about, particularly in the transportation space, when you think about congestion management on highways, and there was a period of time where lots of people weren't driving to work because they were quarantining and they were at home. A lot of people still were driving to work, but the traffic volumes and the traffic patterns in this region changed dramatically in 2020. And that created new opportunities and challenges for how we respond to that. So our scenario planning effort that we kicked off several years ago started to kind of, even before COVID, started to introduce this idea that we can't predict all of the things that may happen in the future. So how do we think about our region from a readiness perspective to be as responsive as possible to things that we can and can't anticipate? And how do we envision a future that helps us to kind of stay the course on the direction that we want to go when those inevitable disruptors happen? And so as we explored that from a really solid data-driven perspective and building this data model to be able to evaluate those types of things, our staff started to have internal conversations about how we could expand that way of thinking to our actual regional planning efforts. And so we've leveraged that scenario planning pathways to the future model to become thematically the way that we think about the holistic way that we plan as a community. I've shared some of these slides before, and if you came to our regional symposium in March, you saw these. So I'm trying to kind of repeat where I think it bears repeating, but also not be too repetitive that it gets boring. But this past year, we launched a pretty significant effort to really coalesce our regional strategic plan that starts to integrate the different planning products that are developed by the Planning Commission and by the TPO to start to really build out the interconnection between them, among them, and the reality that none of these in and of themselves are going to move the region forward. It really is the integrated and collection of them that help us realize that future that we envision. So just to let you know where we are in that journey, on June 12th, skipping to the bottom of the slide, our commission board is set to adopt the Pathways to the Future vision, strategic vision. And we've been through kind of a year-long process of developing that set of vision statements, vetting those with various different public engagement and stakeholder engagement activities, most recently with the regional symposium that we held in March, and then also going through an advertisement and public comment period. So the regional vision is really built on 5 interconnected themes: strategic and resilient infrastructure, a healthy environment, attainable housing, a strong economy, and opportunity and choice for everyone. And so this document is available online. We can send it out as a link afterwards, so you can kind of read what each of those statements mean. But this is the summation, if you will, of what we have defined as that regional vision. And this really is developed by reviewing all of the localities' comprehensive plans. In the cases where localities have strategic plans, we've reviewed those, and this is the amalgamation of that we believe and have gotten feedback that these 5 elements are consistent with the collection of those goals across the region. So I think you can start to see too that, some of you are here specifically because you serve on the Community Transportation Advisory Committee. You can imagine how transportation really connects through all of these. On the commission side, that's really where everything, including transportation, but also extending beyond to economic development and housing and emergency preparedness and environmental issues. And again, you can see how those themes really do interconnect across these 5 connected areas. So as we head into next fiscal year, we're using this kind of guide, this regional framework to think about how we form our priorities for next fiscal year. The policy board is scheduled to meet on May 27th. So I'm just working sequentially here from a timeline perspective. The policy board will meet to review the draft Unified Planning Work Program that has these key priorities highlighted there. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those mean on the next couple slides. And then on June 12th, the commission is scheduled to meet to review the body of work that the whole commission supports, and those 2 together will comprise the work that we have to do for the coming year. So there's a handful of multi-year regional efforts that I'll talk about that are continuing into fiscal 2026 that we'll continue to support. I mentioned earlier our 2025 federal certification review from a compliance perspective is a really big deal. And so we want to make sure that we are prepared for that, not just as a staff, but our community of planners and partners in that space. This core plan convergence is not just related to this regional strategic plan, but also in the universe of transportation planning. We have this interesting moment that we're in where our triennial certification review is happening, the update of the 6-year improvement program, the update of the long-range transportation plan, and our annual work planning program is all happening at one time. So it's overwhelming, but it's also a really great time to make sure that all of those pieces and kind of parts of the planning process are truly integrated and they're functioning the way that they should together. The policy board, as you may well know, has really taken a keen interest in thinking about how we can prioritize safety in our planning. And so there's been an extensive conversation over the last couple of months about how, as a region, we really need to curb the number as we, as a region, move to a much more robustly multimodal system. How do we think about safety as a key integrated part of that and make sure that, again, those deaths and transportation related critical injuries are at best plateauing, at worst plateauing, and really driving those numbers down as opposed to up. And then finally, as I mentioned, this region really is evolving fairly rapidly into a multimodal community. And so understanding the benefits of that, but also those inherent conflicts of the various modes that we have. And that's everything that we know about today, like scooters down on the sidewalk downstairs, but also thinking about what, emerging technologies are there. I think many of us have probably been to other cities where you're seeing those robot delivery things driving around and that kind of stuff. That hasn't hit Richmond yet, but I mean, I think it's fair to say it's on its way. And so really, how do we start to understand what drone drops in our backyard from Amazon look like, and all kinds of things like that to really understand how goods and people are gonna be moving around this region. So to get into a little bit more detail, we'll talk a little bit more about the reality of, from a data perspective, the development of our transportation demand model. This idea of really supporting our public transit and making sure that we're moving in a direction that is supporting that frequent and accessible service. Stephanie, I hope you're glad to hear that one. Sorry, my vision is not so great. Oh, advancing the Fall Line Trail. Certainly that has been a huge success for the region, and we want to make sure that those kinds of multi-jurisdictional trail development projects continue. So, you know, we're probably all very excited about the groundbreakings that have happened, but we still need to make sure that the financing is in place to complete that Fall Line Trail, and then also think about spur planning and the realities of extension westward of Capitol Trail and things like that. So Phil, who's in the room, is leading that effort, and what are opportunities for alignment with the Lower Appomattox River Trail and just making those regional trail connections possible. Continuing to advance those prior year studies. So we have the bike head RVA plan as well as our region's transit vision plan. And so those are aspirational plans for where we want to see the region go for those two modes, and making sure that we are working that plan to not only envision it, but see it come to life. CBTA has been a huge partner for us in the last 5 years since it was formed. Kristen knows these numbers better than I do, but the amount of investment that we've been able to put back into the community from that fuel and sales tax is just really astounding. It's been able to move projects that have been on the wish list for a long time to be on the ground. And our plan is that we're very successful in the upcoming CTB meeting with the announcement of smart scale projects. If the staff recommendations hold for smart scale this year, really CBTA is the reason why our region in particular fared so well. But we're just really pleased to see the output of that effort and the ability to leverage CBTA revenue to be competitive with smart scale money to move these critical projects forward. And then finally, just continuing to build on our public engagement and outreach strategies. So these are the 6 kind of continued planning efforts that transcend fiscal years. And then these are the 3 really core kind of what I'll say new priorities are for the coming fiscal year. Mentioning again, data coordination, outreach, and engagement. We'll be updating our transportation demand model. Also really, I think, continuing to evolve our thinking on what it means to have meaningful outreach and engagement in the community, and not just in specific program areas or projects, but really what does it mean to have that kind of an ongoing effort with our engagement. We're thinking a lot more holistically, as you can tell, around integrated planning. So thinking from an interconnectedness perspective about the relationship between transportation and housing and economy, what our system readiness looks like, and that is really a responsiveness to flood. We've been in a flood watch and warning this week, right? And so really how does our transportation infrastructure respond to that? How do we make sure that we can still move about and be across the region safely when we have these different types of potential hazards that our region faces and that kind of thing. Connecting the built environment with the impacts on our environment and our natural resources is continuing to be a priority for us. Transit and passenger rail will continue to be, as I mentioned earlier, but with a new initiative this year really focused on supporting our region's transit providers in building a financing sustainability plan for zero fare access. So working not only with GRTC, but Dash and Bay Transit, and really thinking about what it looks like to have transit access across the region that doesn't rely on a user pay model solely. And then focusing again on active transportation and really integrating our freight and intermodal planning. That has economic development implications, but also certainly just from how we all receive our goods and services is a big deal for the region. And then finally, that last bucket is that short range planning. Financial programming is a big part of what the MPO does on a monthly basis, and making sure that the dollars are being attached to projects and effectively moving things forward. But as I spoke earlier, this newer focus on safety and making sure that we're really focused on safe streets and roads And our system reliability is another big part of the Sears work program. I'll take a pause there and ask if there are any questions on this is really focused on transportation, its integration to other program areas, but is there anything that you felt is missing or lacking?
I do have a question, going back, several, slides, and I'm not nitpicking on your choice of words, but you have attainable housing, and I'm used to affordable housing. Can you comment on the use of that word? Is
Sure.
it more expansive? Does it include, smart growth, accessory dwelling units, or why that word?
So affordable housing carries a connotation that it's specific to a certain income level, and attainable housing has been adopted as a more inclusive term, to be able to say, kind of regardless of the income level, we want to have housing choice across the region.
Workforce.
So attainable housing tends to be more of a catch-all term for low income housing, workforce housing, market rate housing, the whole mix of housing type, but also housing cost. So it's kind of intended to be a little bit more of an inclusive, expansive
Thank you.
phrase.
Thank you.
Can I ask the same question about the word strategic for infrastructure? I'm assuming every word in this was hammered out intentionally.
Right.
And so I'm curious what strategic is meant to embody there.
Yeah, I think depending on the application, we were talking earlier about kind of just do projects, form the strategy, or does strategy inform the projects? I think in this case, it's really the idea, in very specific terms, we have an active project right now, focused on the identification and siting of what we call resilience hubs. So these are place-based locations where in the event of a disaster, the surrounding community can be served for a variety of different purposes and needs. And so thinking about it from that perspective, that's infrastructure that we want to build in this community that's got an attachment to a physical location, but strategically we want to place that where it makes the most sense, where it'll be accessible to perhaps more vulnerable populations that would need to be served by that facility. But also strategically, we want to make sure that those locations are sited in places that when it's in non-disaster times, what opportunities would that physical location do to serve the surrounding community? So that's how I think about that use of that word.
Could you give an example of one of those communities that's resilient infrastructure? I'm not quite following.
Yeah, so the term resilient is really thinking about how can we withstand natural disasters. So you think about well, one step that this community has taken that's really close to us geography wise is the flood walls. The installation of those flood walls help us that in the event that there's a high water, I'm just thinking about flooding right now because it's been raining a lot lately and the river levels are high. But we can see evidence on the buildings in Chaco Bottom of what happened before those flood walls were installed. And so that's infrastructure that helps build and maintain our region's infrastructure resiliency. And it's strategically located so that we can make sure that we're protecting our assets, ideally saving lives and loss of property.
Thank you.
I know one consideration along the specific lines for that specific community is treating the train station as a potential resilience hub because it's elevated to allow that community to potentially evacuate to it.
Right.
And have resources there. So that would be,
Yeah,
I know that's something specifically talked about.
Again, I'm pushing outside of my area of expertise because we've got people on staff who study this work, but I think many of us might remember in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, the story of the Superdome and the reality that just because there's a giant space that people could be congregated doesn't mean that's the right space to congregate people and provide aid. And so this notion of resiliency hub, I won't say it's not a response to that, but I think that there's been a lot of evolved thinking over the last couple of decades about this idea that we've got to be more person-centered and more community-centered in how we think about response to various types of disasters. And it can't be a one-size-fits-all, but it also can't be just because there's this giant room, we're gonna clamor everybody in there and that's gonna solve the problem, because that created more problems than solved it for very many people. So I'll skip over to the commission side of things. Sorry, I said I'm not pointing at where I'm supposed to. It's easier when I do what he told me I should do. On the commission side of things, our executive committee met in February and then shared with the full board. This is the set of key imperatives that our staff have been directed to focus on and really hone in on, and we're building our budget to be in alignment with that. So when I think about Plan RVA and the Regional Commission, one of our primary responsibilities is to be this conduit for federal funding and to make sure that we're the deliverer of services from a compliance and a credibility perspective. So it makes a lot of sense that ensure compliance and agency sustainability, particularly in these times where the certainty of federal funding is a little bit less than it normally is. So that's top of the priority scale for us in the coming fiscal year. But continuing on some of these other themes of really making sure that the work that we do is data driven. We're bringing data and research and best practices, subject matter expertise to the table for our decision makers in the region to make the most informed and best decisions that they can with that information. So some of the activities I'm really excited about in category are we're really going to be leaning into and launching our regional indicators dashboard in alignment with RVA Rising and our growing collaboration with the Chamber and the Community Foundation and the United Way to support strategies that promote economic mobility in the region. That could actually be a piece of the puzzle when you were asking earlier about indexing. We're also going to be providing through funding that the local governments have approved for this coming fiscal year, individualized demographic reports, kind of demographic profiles for each of our 9-member jurisdictions. So I think about those of you that serve on your planning commissions, this might be helpful for you, but also anybody who's really involved in working your communities or organizations, it could be helpful to be able to, again, as Kristen mentioned, really understand who's in the community, how that the makeup and mix of the community has been changing over time, and how do our local governments respond to meet those changing needs. From a planning assistance perspective, we'll be leaning in fairly heavily on a couple of local and regional priorities that are emerging. We'll be supporting the local governments in this region to develop their regional water supply plan for the over the coming years. The DEQ has a requirement that sorry, I want to say this correctly. Localities have been required to prepare water supply plans for some time. There's a new mandate that says that localities need to work together on a regional basis to plan for their water needs over a 20-year planning horizon, I believe. So Plan RVA will be playing a convener role in that to support the local governments maintaining compliance with that requirement. We're also looking at supporting Central Virginia Waste Management Authority in addressing their solid waste plan. We've got landfill capacity issues in the region where we don't have life expectancy of our regional landfill system isn't going to meet, in perpetuity. So we've got a plan for the future on that. So we'll be working together with them on that. And there will be a number of other probably localized requests that will come in over the course of the year to be able to support what our local governments need individually. The bulk of the work of the agency is really in updating and implementing that regional strategic vision and core plans. We've got a lot of regional plans going on right now. We're in the middle of the update to the long range transportation plan. We've also initiated the kickoff of our comprehensive economic development strategy that will wrap in September. Our comprehensive climate action plan that really focuses on greenhouse gas reductions and air quality is set to be complete in December and submitted to EPA. We've got the kickoff of our region's natural resource plan that focuses a lot on the benefits of green infrastructure throughout the region and how localities can think about incorporation of green infrastructure into their development planning. What am I missing? We've got a couple of studies that are going to be kicking off this year. Yeah, thank you. A market value analysis. It's the third time we've done an evaluation of housing market trends. We're expanding that from the last 2 times we've been able to complete that project. It was focused on the urbanized portions of Chesterfield, Richmond, and Henrico. We're expanding that study to the entirety of the region this year. And so that project will be kicking off, and it will be available to us to really think about housing market trends over time and the implications of things like the fall line trail on housing affordability, or you know, when we make infrastructure investments in certain parts of the community, how does that affect the neighborhood from a market value perspective? And then finally, you know, really, I think foundationally and core to what the commission does is we bring people together. And so whether that's through community engagement and outreach, it's through the committee work that we do, or it's through convening various professionals across the region, like our Emergency Management Alliance. You know, this idea of bringing people together who have care and consideration for the future of the region, and how do we solve those problems together? That's kind of the crux of what planning district commissions are all about. And so we'll continue that work in a variety of different capacities this next fiscal year. Oh my gosh, I'm tired of talking. So again, to kind of recap, we've rebranded this notion of our system of plans under this Pathways to the Future banner. This is a little bit of a debut, if you will, of how we're branding and logoing that. So the long range transportation plan is Pathways to the Future Transportation. I think we're really clever. No, we don't. Pathways to the Future, natural resources, economic development, and so on, so that we can really start to make sure that from a community perspective, these plans, we want to make sure that we're conveying to the community, these plans are talking to each other, they're integrated, they consider each other in how they think about the future of the region, and you know, really are working as a system. We are working as a system to move things forward. This is just a timeline so that you can see how those different plans roll out. The darker color shading on each row is indicating the time frame for the plan, and then the lighter color is, you know, when we're not planning, we're implementing, right? And so just gives you a show, and you can see 2026 is a really big year for us because we've got at least 3 of those 4 plans really moving forward in a big way next year. That's it.
Great.
So Kristen's gonna take us kind of from a presentation mode, thankfully, to a work session mode, thinking about the role of CTAC and public outreach in this work and what it could mean for us all.
Well, I also just wanna, and I don't know, I always get ready to stand up, right? I also just wanna say that if you are following us on socials, which I hope everyone is, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, you would see that just yesterday, there was a video post, a video from Chet Parsons, Executive Director of the CVTA, talking about what excites him about the work they're doing, and mentioning the $906.6 million in lifetime allocations since 2020. And I just find that to be astounding, that the next milestone party would be $1 billion of, you know, infrastructure planning. I just continue to be fascinated by CVTA, that it exists, that the legislature came together and created something like that, and that we get to be so close to watching what happens. And I encourage you to show up at a meeting sometime and just kind of listen. The other thing is, I hope that you have a device with you today, but if you don't, we're ready for you, right? And it's not that it's better to use the device, but we really want to get some thoughts from you about, you know, your membership on these committees, kind of how you view, you know, how you're hearing all of these, this discussion about the commission side, the TPO side, and a little bit about CVTA, and, you know, why you decided to join these committees, how you see yourself helping to advance this work, what connection you feel. You're each individual, unique human beings. We appreciate each one of you individually. Collectively, you can do fantastic things. So if you would, scan the code, or you can go to menti.com and enter in the code at the top of the screen, which hopefully you can see in front of you at the top. But scanning really is the easiest way. And my job on the other side, if you would rather participate on paper, I've waited because I want to encourage people. I do have a paper version, but then we of course won't see your results up there. So if anyone would rather have a paper version, I'm happy to release you. And you won't be able to answer anything quite yet because I haven't advanced the slide. Is there anyone else that would like a paper version? You're there on the slide, you're exactly.
Save my battery.
And this is intended to be anonymous, because it encourages, people to, you can always reach out and tell us in person or by email, with your name attached. But it is nice, I think, to have some conversation where people can see everything that everyone else is saying. But have enough quiet time. So this first slide is just asking, in my committee role, because we have these two committees coming together, I can help advance this work by. So personally, just you yourself, what is my, of all the things I heard today and what I know about the work of the TPO and Plan RBA in the region, how do I see myself helping to advance the work programs, whether it's community engagement or even just awareness about what the commission or the committees are working on? You can answer that and it will show up right here. So you're having real time, someone saying they're going to share information. So if you have a paper version, it's really, there's a side there where you have some bullet points where you could just, it's a time for you to personally just self-reflect. So it'll be a little quiet while we do that. But I'm going to read out for all of us. These active words, sharing, showing up.
Bicyclist. It's bike to work day, right? Anybody else bike to work today? Yeah, all right. Or every day. There are many of you who do this every day.
Every day is bike to work.
That's true.
You have the right mindset.
And yes, and our folks online have the link. So some of these comments could be from our friends on with us online. I like hearing the years of experience as a cyclist. I mean, certainly, each of you has your own expertise as well, or your lived experience that we value very much as your perspective from a resident of the region that we're all serving. And you can see the variation. There's some that think about policy changes, and I can even keep scrolling, focusing on policy. Some about sharing with faculty and students, again, coming from your perspective role outside of the committee, right? It's a full-time job or a part-time or a hobby that you do. I think all of those things help us. We have new people who are here to learn and some people who've been serving on committees for more than a decade or two. Volunteering, I love to hear that. Technical assistant. And you can see in doing an activity like this, it allows for all the voices to equally be displayed, anyone who is choosing to participate. It also gives us a record of those things so that we can keep in mind what you all are saying about how you see yourself showing up, or and there'll be another, we'll move on to the next question. This isn't the only one. What's that bottom left one? Yeah. Keeps coming in. Sharing quick and cheap ways to improve multi-multi use of existing roads. Lived experience, thank you.
2 good words.
Bringing information and plans back to my community. Yeah, so sharing, bringing.
I know that'll be a test.
Nobody tell them you can submit more than one.
Yeah, it's not limited.
I like this guy. We're in the right role, so.
I'll also just mention that when we do activities like this, it's demonstrating some of what we like to bring to the community. There are many people who would come to a meeting and just never speak up and take on a speaking role or raise their hand, but they have a lot to say, and it's important to allow people to have multimodal ways of participating. Yes, Lisa.
I tried to go back and lost it. Can you put the QR code up again?
I can. You can go to menti.com and then the code where when you reach there. Yes.
The code's written on top of the screen.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna bring you the
black
paper.
bar up there. That
Paper
happened to me
copies.
too. So
type that code in and it'll show where you need to be.
Okay, thank you.
I like it. Getting prepared as we go.
The other benefit of doing something like this, if you were coming back to a community, this is a type of data gathering that doesn't put anyone at sort of risk for sharing their thoughts. If you can imagine asking for what are some of the things you don't like about something? And if you're planning to go back to that community, you can then cull all of these responses and share that back. Which absolutely is a desire, I think, in working with you all, is to develop a sense of, you know, what are other people thinking and sharing? It's not just for us to have this, so we can share these results for you to look at in this format.
Will we be able to get a follow-up printout or?
Yes, absolutely. So this is one of the tools we've invested in to make sure that we are nimble in the way we're engaging folks. Of course, there's also, did I just make it bigger like that? I don't know. I think I did something. There we go. Oh my goodness. There we go. I did something. So thank you for putting these in. We are going to transition in just a second to you all talking to each other. So this is, again, one of the ways that, you know, you sort of get some thoughts into the room and you can sort of hear what other people are thinking without necessarily knowing who might be thinking those thoughts. And you learn a little bit about who else is in the room. The next slide that we're going to does not have something for you to do on the digital platform. It's to turn to your neighbor. You may be sitting next to someone who's on the same committee as you or someone who's not, someone who's new to a committee. So the idea would be to compare some of your thoughts or even ask sort of, you know, what brought you to the committee. If you don't know who you're sitting next to, introduce yourself. But just have some conversation in the room. How do you see from your respective committee advancing this work and what are some of the thoughts you have? So please.
Yeah.
There's a lot more than. Than there are. Well, they all have to compete.
Thank you and welcome back. That was like, I
Yeah.
never was a preschool teacher, but that's a really, did you recognize Frere Jacques from the beginning? No, or like youth group. We are now wanting to just sort of, hear from you a little bit. That's the best part of like the think, pair, share, right? You had a first part to think for yourself, pair, and sort of ask questions and talk to each other. And so what can we share out? And we're back online. We had muted for a little while. Thank you, our folks online. I do want to just go ahead and read a comment that we had in the chat that many of you aren't seeing. From John Hamilton, and said, in response to compare the thoughts activity, how can we speed up projects such as the fall line? So, even asking questions is part of this. I'm sure you were doing that of each other. So thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I don't know the answer to that. How can we speed up the fall line? But it's good to have your input, and I think people may have that same thought. Could we just hear from anyone who's interested? So now we'll do popcorn style. What were some commonalities or things that you learned from each other about how you would all be advancing this work? Or see yourself doing that?
Frank and I both didn't really know how we can get more involved in trying to figure it out. How do we get involved? So, personally, I'm interested in, the making, I live in West End of Henrico. We have a lot of wide streets, but not very many bike lanes or sidewalks. So how do we reallocate road space for multimodal usage? So that I feel like that's one thing that's, it's a safety factor. It's an environment, it's an economic, it's all of the above. So anyway, that's one way that I'm interested in getting involved, trying to figure out not just doing that in where I live, but regionally. And I don't know, I think this being on the CTAC is a good first step, but I don't know how to get involved beyond it. So.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share? This is definitely open. Stephanie and then Mr. Waddell.
So I'll say that Mr. Ledbetter and we kind of just had some dialogue getting to know one another, and what I like about this conversation was, I haven't had a chance to speak with someone who is from Hanover County. He sits on the planning commission of Hanover County. So we don't have like a lot of overlap, and I thought one thing that was interesting was I shared, I live in Eastern Henrico, but I work mainly in Richmond, and I advocate for a better bus system. That's my full-time job. And I was sharing that I, for the last 3 years, have been a full-time biker and bus rider. And his response was, oh, I can't really imagine that, which is totally valid, because where Mr. Ledbetter lives, it doesn't make as much sense, right? They've got a tiny paratransit service that I was learning called Hanover Dash. But what I like about that conversation is, I don't know that I would have had the chance to speak with you otherwise. Yeah. And so we're meeting, we're getting to learn a little bit about one another. And I think that really strengthens the work, because it starts building those relationships and helps us kind of see other people's perspectives. And I know also from like if we want to act as a region, we're going to have these conversations, right? And move each other forward, understand each other. So.
Love the spirit.
Where to begin? When I was asked if I was interested in CTAC and had a general idea of what it was, I looked to see what the membership encompassed, and I was optimistic. The diversity of the group, the backgrounds, the expertise inspire me. I just met John Leonard, VCU instructor in data process in my former career. Now I'm an agitator, or whatever you want to call it. But he's also got experience with transportation in Georgia, where Department of Transportation and tolls and funding. And I'm thinking he and the rest of us are on the right team, because the initiatives that we can bring forward. In fact, last night I was sitting doing some thinking about transportation, and I'll share that idea later. I am doubly encouraged and optimistic and challenged, this is a powerful committee that we can bring forth initiatives for consideration and research to Plan RVA and to CVTA. We can drive this. Thank you all for being part of it.
We discovered we're both transportation.
Yes, and the metaphor too.
She's quick.
On point. Tony, did you have something? And then anything else on this one?
Well,
Did you?
Well,
Go ahead,
yeah,
Sam.
we similarly talked and hadn't spoken much before, but, and this is just sort of a random thing, but we both were involved with or knowledgeable of about the travel training the GRTC does. That if you haven't ridden the bus before or don't know what to do, somebody from GRTC can come to your house, show you how to ride the bus. And so many people are afraid of transit, and it's a great service, but that was just something we talked about. So,
And to add, to piggyback on that, it just, that very brief encounter that we had, it just reminded me that there's not nearly enough of that. I know in my own job, and I work at a very typical job for a local nonprofit, the Span Center, and so busy with operations that I know that pre-pandemic, it seemed like there were more built-in opportunities to have the sorts of kind of vague, conceptual, touchy-feely kind of get to know each other conversations that we just don't have no time for no more, it seems like. And I don't know why we don't have time for it anymore, but it's the answer to that across the board seems to be that we're all so busy. Well, yeah, we are busy, but I think that it's worth arguing for to make it a priority to have spaces and times and opportunities to have those kinds of things, because that's what gets your gut involved in all of it.
Thank you for saying that. I would agree as well. I think, you know, some people do have some time anxiety about even this meeting about ending on time, but that feeling that you get from feeling as though you left knowing more about other people in the room than when you came in is an intangible, but it's a real, it's what makes community. And yeah, that should be also in these committees as well, of all the places you represent. Did anyone online want to add any thoughts? I know we can't have a breakout room in a webinar, sadly, but anyone online, Mr. Hamilton or Cameron or?
Mr. Hamilton has his hand.
Yes, Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah, thanks. It seems to me on many of our projects, we get regional buy-in at a high level, but then when you get down to the details where hard decisions have to be made, you end up with paralysis or veto by a locality. Is there a way to shift that so that the buy-in is given up front and we can move projects along without having those lower individual vetoes when, you know, but in other words, a trust in that body that they're going to do the best they can, but recognizing their hard decisions to be made and not veto.
I wonder if any of you all in the committee have any thoughts about that, or if we're leaving that as a rhetorical question to ponder. Anyone have a burning thought on shifting the consensus priority?
I don't know if it can be done, but in a conversation with Joe Vadunas, Transportation of Hanover County, talking about smart scale, 6-year plan and others, it's got to start with an idea, a concept, a study, and then it goes through further refinement. And it's always about the money to change the order of things. I don't know that I like the idea, but I don't know if it could be done. Because as you go through from a concept to idea to a plan, further refinement limitations. That's been my experience in some projects I've done.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mr.
It feels like a very valuable but difficult question, and so maybe it's like a parking lot, how do we work
Yeah.
toward that, and to what degree is getting information out to the community about some big thing going on, so when you get a high level achievement and that then the community didn't come back to their local planning commission and go, yeah, but not in my neighborhood or whatever, right? So what role do we have in help?
Just, you use the term parking lot, and I know what that means. I've heard in another organization I was a part of, they call it the bike rack now. Not the parking lot.
There's also the treasure box, so that
Okay.
you're like, the full of treasures. Partial to that.
If I could add something based on Charlie, my conversation to, and this is definitely intended for the treasure box, because I don't know what this looks like. I applaud the conversations about better connecting amongst us and perspectives we get. And from the earlier exercise, one of the things I really value about this get together is knowing more about what's going on so that I can bring it back to the community. But what I think I heard Michael say, and a little bit of what Charlie and I talked about, touched on the fact that some of the expertise and passion and interest of participants in groups like this and the commission overall is to do stuff, to give input that is then acted on or be a part of making something happen. And one of the things that I think is worth at least a little bit of look and further feedback is whether the desire for people to be involved is being leveraged enough by folks on the committee. In other words, we have various structures and committees, and they meet and they review work that the staff has done, excellent work that the staff has done. But is there opportunity for some or all of us to get sort of a little closer to the metal in terms of like, let's review some of these transportation projects. Let's get our hands dirty with making stuff happen. Let's take specific action back to our community. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but there's a little bit of a sense that we may be kind of floating above the issues as opposed to really helping drive them. And that may just come from the fact that we have a much better, my sense is we have a better staffed with experts group doing transportation and planning for us now through the Plan RVA transportation groups. But are we being leveraged enough? Is there more opportunity to take the committee membership and make that feel like we're contributing and that it's really impacting the community? And I don't know if any of my fellow participants have that desire or if they're more like,
Well, thank you for that.
29 minutes.
Many
and
of
we're
us
done.
have been working toward that for a number of years, so, thank you for hitting the nail on the head. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about what you just said, because I want to repeat back something to you to see if I understood you correctly. Do you think sometimes that that people in the jobs that most of us are in, that we tend to be just very outcomes oriented to the detriment of some other concepts? Was that sort of what you're saying? Like, rather than really getting into the meat of something, just wanting to report, like for me, it would be the number of rides provided, the number of, people served, and in the demographics, how you would break that down and everything. I'm so concerned with that am I really thinking conceptually about the program and the issues? Is that kind of what you meant?
I think that's an element of it. I was literally more poking at the and it may just be the role, but a lot of times a committee or commission's role is to sort of see what work's been done and say, yep, that looks good, and then go back to what we do. And I wonder to what degree we ought to be a little closer to the metal of doing stuff, achieving, bringing our expertise in, taking your expertise in ridership or whatever, and actually having that impact smart scale application or whatever. And I don't know if that's right, but my sense, been involved for a couple of years, is that this is a somewhat high level kind of, keep involved, hear what's going on, everything looks good. And there's a role for that, right? And maybe that's exactly where it should be, right? But I hear people, and Charlie talked about that sometimes you just want to be a little more with like what's really going on. What did I contribute to this besides Hey, that looks, thanks, that looks like a good plan.
I wanna intercept here because I do think that is a great set of questions and line of thought. Great for the bike rack. I think we should redirect to Michael Testerman. It looks like Mr. Hamilton has another thought, but I wanna make sure that we keep moving forward. But absolutely, those are thoughts and conversations that have been had on the CTAC side for a long time. And that's the direction that we have been moving. So good to have you catch on to that as well and just keep that conversation going. So Mr. Testerman, and then Sarah, I see you have your hand up, and then we'll go back to Mr. Hamilton.
Hi, everybody. I'm calling you from East Tennessee. I've been on CTAC for about 30 years, and so I've watched the progression of regional planning and focus. I think we're doing a really good job right now of engaging the public, but from my own experience as a rail advocate and transit advocate, we're more or less just going with the flow of general public policy, and in our own region, the transit system has so much potential to move everyday citizens, and I think it's still focused on reaching the marginal and transit dependent population rather than people who have a choice of options. So this is one of the things I would like to see us maybe as a group promote a more robust vision for connecting the region, especially as density grows by leaps and bounds within the traditional city core. I think we need probably some kind of a better circulator system so that really don't need cars nearly as much as we even have them now. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. Thank you very much. Sarah?
Yes, I know you said to table a little bit this question, but I was just gonna respond. Yes, some of us who've been on CTAC for like some time have been working on what's a better way for CTAC to have a role that really is more engaged in what's going on and what kind of transit changes are happening, but maybe to the point that was made, there's a question that we could all like answer for you all, like about what our like strengths are and what our hopes of like what kind of work we'd like to put in, rather than like all trying to be community engagement specialists. Like we could tell you what we're really passionate about or something like that. Just an idea.
Absolutely. And then Mr. Hamilton, your hand was up. It looks like you've lowered it.
Can I just
yeah,
respond to
sure.
Sarah,
Yes.
and I'm very much interested personally in my role here in Holly's in getting to know each of you more, and that very question about we hate to just survey people for the sake of surveying. I think potentially after this conversation where we've heard so much feedback about the differentiation between people's backgrounds and expertise and even time on these committees. And of course, the the Public Outreach and Community Engagement Committee for the Commission is only a few years old. That does not have the same history in time as the CTAC. I think it's really, we're gonna have more response to potentially a survey like that, asking you those things after we've had a discussion where you can see how much potentially unique perspectives are, knowing that outreach and engagement is certainly the focus of the commission committee. But so I appreciate that. So what I'm hearing is that if we are to ask you in a more, sort of robust or time accommodating way, that you would have things to share about your desires and where you would want to see. And I think that was really the genesis of this question. How do you see yourself advancing this work? And it's going to be different for every person, but hopefully some overlap because you are working together on committees. So thank you for that. There's just one more question on the Menti.
Sorry, Chris.
Yes,
Mr.
sorry.
Hamilton
Yes,
raises his
Mr.
hand.
Hamilton.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I had lowered it so you'd already listed that you'd come to me. Great discussion. I see it as achieving an alignment of community values where we're able to bring in our values and then align them with the projects that are out there, which would then necessitate some feedback, not to second guess engineering decisions, but to say, how are we doing relative to aligning to those values? That's, my thought.
Thank you very much.
So if you go back to the Menti, just one more time. And you can scan that, or you can enter the code there. There's just, and on the paper one, and of course we'll collect those because your name is not on this. We want to get your feedback. There's just one more. Should these two important committees work more closely together? So, and what could that look like? But this initial one is just, do you think that the committees do need to work more closely together? Yes, definitely. I need more information. Or no, you think they really are serving two different goals and they don't have as much need to come together to do work.
Well, I have a question.
Sure, still coming.
Yes. Question is, with the Plan RVA public outreach and engagement, do they cover all the other topics besides transportation? So this is just one fraction of their work. So maybe periodically, as they focus on transportation, it makes sense to meet with CTAC. I mean, but they have other responsibilities besides transportation. Right, I'm asking for confirmation.
Yeah, you are right. I think.
Kristen, you have
Well, I was
responded,
over
turned
comments,
off.
but I
Oh,
said
yeah.
no.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it's not here.
And it was not me.
I was like, it won't.
That'd be the first time it wasn't my fault.
There it is. All right.
Sorry, Martha, continue.
I kind of bleeds into what I was gonna do in the next item.
Yeah, we're transitioning, I think, out of this activity, but just as these votes come in, I think, and on your paper, you can do that as well. Yeah, they are definitely two different committee.
Like the dog.
But as we were talking earlier, Martha was sharing about the intersectionality of all the core programs, and that the work moving forward is to be less siloed in the way the programs work together. I think that's a spirit in the room, hopefully, about the way forward and the working plan moving forward.
I think, I wanna frame, if it's okay, I'll move to the next item.
Yeah.
But I mean, we built this agenda to be kind of this progressive discussion today, and I think, some of the things that have been said in the comments and in the discussion today, I wouldn't say is new information for us, and I think that that's why we wanted to have the conversation. I feel like, Tony, I'll go back to your comment about this. What you said about this feeling that like everyone's just so busy really resonated with me, and it feels like, at Plan RVA that is staffed the TPO. So I say that kind of from a global perspective. I feel like we're at a place where we're trying to discern, are we spending our time on the right things? And so how do we staff of these organizations play a role, not the role, to be clear on that, but how do we do our part to design agendas, plan meetings, put content together that is, I think, leveraging the expertise in the room more effectively. That's been something that we've been grappling with for a while now, and we hear in one-on-one conversations that, we're not as effective as we want to be on that. And at the same time, I think to just be really candid and vulnerable as staff, it's hard to break the mold of the system that we've been operating in for, in some cases, decades. And so I think one of the things I hope to do through today's conversation is to invite a more collective conversation about how we could move forward. I don't know that we have all the answers. I don't know that you all do either, but maybe together we could sort of think about how to reframe our process and that kind of thing. And themes I heard today are, again, are we spending our time on the right things? Are we busying ourselves with trying to produce content that you all will be proud of? Or should we be spending our time engaging with you all and facilitating you all to engage with each other so that as a collective, your voice can move through the channels that the committees were designed to do? I think we've been designing agendas for a really long time that were about presentation. And I mean, almost all of us, I think, are pleasers, so we want to get the thumbs up that we've done a good job, right? I mean, we're not, I don't think, structuring things in a way that necessarily are nurturing the type of conversation that many of y'all were talking about. And again, I think just to be transparent and vulnerable, I don't know that we've been wired that way organizationally for a pretty long time. And so I think we're being open with you all that I think our desire and intent is to shift that a little bit. I think we need your help in understanding how. I mean, I think about Tim, we've been a really effective supporter of this organization as we've evolved through our strategic planning and sort of helping to think about that. But it takes a little bit of a rewiring of how we operate, and it doesn't happen overnight. So I think hearing some of the things that you all talked about today resonate with conversations that we've had before and have been trying to grapple through. And I think we're trying to figure that out. And you know, what do we let go of so that we can make that space and time to have the more enriching conversations and to leverage the expertise in the room in a different way than we have historically. So the item here, uniform system for committee work and work groups, is was intended to kind of be a wrap to this conversation, but also to say that my theory is that we have made it pretty hard. We collectively, not Plan RVA staff specifically, but we collectively have made it pretty hard for somebody who cares to want to get involved. Like it's just gotten really hard. And I think we as staff want to do our part to dismantle that. And in part, I think that means we want to make some things look more consistent. So in our agency, program to program, project to project, we use different language. We use different meeting formats. I mean, it's almost impossible for somebody to see the through line like we do because we're in it every day. It's hard for other people to see that through line because depending on what staff member is leading the project, they might be running it in a Teams meeting or they might be running it in a Zoom meeting. And those things seem small, but it's actually, I think, a little bit disorienting and jarring to everybody else in the world. We communicate differently depending on who the staff member is and all those kinds of things. We use this really beautiful email service for one of our steering committees to give updates about projects. We don't use it for another one. So it's like kind of a dry looking black and white text, non-formatted. So I think we're looking for some ways about where we can build some uniformity internally so that whether you came in the front or the side door of this organization or through the transportation program or the environmental program, the experience is kind of the same. And at the same time, we want to be focused on the fact that this is not an organization that produces robots and widgets. So every person has kind of their own customized look and feel and touch for how they want to be interacted with. So I want to say to you all, we're trying to do both at the same time. And we don't want to get lost in actually understanding how we meet you all where you are. So it's a lot. And that's what this item is designed for, is how do we build a little bit of consistency? So if it's a steering committee, like what does that mean? If we ask somebody to join a steering committee, what is the job description of that, generally speaking? And is that different than an advisory group or a working group? I mean, we have a vocabulary that uses every word in the English language to describe basically the same thing. So Janice has been working for the last year to cull through all the different types of convenings that we do. And how can we build a vocabulary that, like, when we say this word, you know what it means, and we know what it means, and everybody knows what it means. So that's happening on our end to kind of get a little bit tighter with our language and our communication and that kind of thing. But we're asking these questions because we know from many of you in one-on-one conversations that we've had that we're not leveraging the expertise in the room. And I think we want to try to figure out with you how to do that better.
In the past, we have met with the commission board, the TPO board, and they seem receptive to having more CTAC involvement. But they don't really know how to use us or how have our level of recommendations or advice be meaningful for them. So maybe more opportunities to interface with them. And so it's not just a report that they get, and they And they would be invited to utilize us back in the localities in some way instead of just passing along some dry information. So, you know, having some opportunities for conferring and maybe putting our heads together to try to figure out something that would be meaningful for them.
Okay.
Martha, what you said resonated with me when you said, we don't know if we're working on the things that we need to be working on or that you want us to be working on. The sort of sense is everything mapped right? I think Plan RVA, from all the documentation that I've seen, you have the pieces. The 3-year plan with the hexagons and showing all these priorities, that's good. That's a good roadmap. You have the unified work program, which I don't think you emphasize the value of that document enough, because that is what you're going to do next year. That's it. If you're not working on the UWP, you're not working on the right thing.
Yeah.
And so what we can be doing is helping shape that UWP. And what I've found challenging from my role in communicating with other people who aren't associated with these kinds of events is they think when you go to a meeting, you can affect change immediately. What they don't understand is there's layers and you're on a track, and that may be a 3-year long track, and the input you're giving now will influence things next year or the year after, not tomorrow. And so it would seem to me, if you put some thought together about creating a 1-page or a 2-page wayfinding document that would show the major activities regionally and temporally about what Plan RVA is doing, and the timescales up to 6 years for the 6-year transportation plan and the shorter range and all that. And then put a little star whenever you go to a meeting on that one common wayfinding document, and has it say, you are here. So you know where you sit at that meeting you're at that point in time within the grand scale of things, because that may simply be enough to help people get their heads in the right space for the kinds of input they're being asked to provide, and helping set expectations for the kinds of change that they can expect to influence at any given time.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't know why I feel like there's not gonna be a recording of this meeting or something.
Following up on John's and also Lisa's comments, the age-old question has always been, what impact has there been on planning activities within our region from information gathered from us? And I use that collective us because there are a lot of committees and a lot of people involved. It's very hard for us to discern that, as John said, because it's a lot of little nuances that go into the planning. But feedback to the committees would be very valued by the committee members, because we spend time coming here and filling out documents, et cetera. And that's what we feel our responsibility is, to be the representative representing our areas, to give the transportation people understanding of what our needs are. But it would be helpful to say, oh, based upon what CTAC, based upon what the engagement committee, that information was used by this committee to make certain critical decisions. Without that feedback coming back, there's, like I say, the age-old question of why are we doing all this if it's not being utilized by the decision-making people. And what Brent was talking about is the utilization of the taxpayers' money towards transportation. And that's what, if we're going to be out engaging our people, They want to know, okay, how are my tax-paying monies being used? And what part of that utilization do you play?
I just want to emphasize something that Lisa and Sarah, I think, both contributed to. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the last three chairs feel this way, but I feel very strongly that we've made a lot of really good strides towards this goal. I think the changes, and I'm speaking only for the CTAC here, I think the changes that the CTAC has gone through over the last 2.5, 3 years have been very valuable, and have made the work that we do at the CTAC and the conversations that we have at the CTAC feel meaningful in a lot of ways that I don't think was the case before. And so I definitely don't want to overlook that feeling of growth and improvement that we have moved in the right direction. Not that I don't think this is an important and valuable conversation to continue having, but I think we have been moving in a good direction. And I think continuing in that direction is good. And we should think of it that way as well.
In trying to summarize what I've heard and digest, here is a thought, a suggestion. We're an advisory group. Why not recommend projects? This could be regional as opposed to local. Recommend a project or projects that we can get behind, we see a need for, and task your folks with as to feasibility, economics, what it would take, and then kind of push that. And I'm going to throw out a thought. I see that Pulse appears to be successful in Richmond, BRT, bus rapid transit. You've got an employment center down at the airport, and you've got an employment center up at the Kings Dominion. Possibly advocate for BRT to and from city of Richmond to the airport, to and from city of Richmond to Kings Dominion, as a project that could be funded, or projects to y'all's suggestion. Feasibility study, recommendation, and see if we can push that. Now, I think to Brett's point, it's a long-term thing. It's not going to happen. Maybe John's not going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. I am mindful of the lead time that it takes every time I drive down to Deltaville on 64, thinking of Patricia Page of New Kent, how she was persistent, and they're naming it after it. You don't want to name a road after me, or a project after me, but that is inspiration, and I can see the need for it, because when I travel, I look at a airport and see what the transportation infrastructure is. Barcelona's got a great one, and Buffalo, New York, and CTAC up in there. We could do it here. It takes funding, it takes an idea, but make a suggestion for a project that you think would benefit the region, and with the criteria of working for employment opportunities for the underserved, transportation, environment, and emergency evacuations, that kind of stuff. Thank you.
So to wrap up now, what six? Almost, did you want to keep it going?
Well, I think we should be respectful of people's.
Yeah,
We can order dinner.
I just don't want us to, if you feel like there's value
Well,
in keeping it moving.
I mean, I don't think that this is not a topic that we expected to get closure on today. But I think we wanted to be able to put it on the table for conversation. I'm wondering if it might be something that we could dedicate time on future agendas, but also our staff are willing and interested, as Chris had mentioned, about doing more one-on-one conversations. And so maybe we could do some of the suggestions around, what are your passions? What are your expertise? You feel like you could lend to the effort. We could start to kind of figure out ways to collect that information, either through conversations or surveying and that kind of thing. And, continue this conversation over the summer so that we can move into the work program next year and try to make those connections a little bit stronger. Okay.
I have to just add that I see this activity as the more intentional start of those conversations, not just an activity for today. That the reason why we asked you to provide us with your thoughts is that we'd like to use those and to move forward with those in mind. So you'll have more opportunities to share some of those thoughts. But it was not just a fun, hopefully, activity today. It was intended to help us gather some data from you and give you all a chance to talk with each other.
And I will say, maybe as a closing comment, I do not want to shirk or minimize our staff role in the process, but each of you were appointed by one of the members or membership of the elected folks that we work for. And so, whether that happened by your local governing board or by the TPO or the commission, I mean, I think we have a thought that some of you are actually more connected with the decision makers in our region than we are, from a leveling perspective. And so, we are, I think, comfortable communicating the conversation as it evolves in these committee meetings, but I have to be honest, your voice directly to those folks matters more than us trying to filter it. And so maybe that's another conversation that could be had, stemming on what Lisa said about how could we as staff support scheduling more opportunity for you all to confer with the levels of these organizations, and maybe we can think about that a little bit. But I just feel like I want to close on that note that we're the hired help. So we want to try to be able to not be barriers to you and your all's influence in the process. But it's my belief that you have more power than you might realize because of your standing in the community, positions you hold, and the connections you have. So I just will maybe close on that.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for that conversation. We will move forward closing out here. The agency updates pages are in the agenda. I'm not going to read them to you, but everybody knows that they're there. Member comments, is there anything somebody wanted to share that is pressing? And I will say not related to the conversation that we just had, for brevity's sake. The only thing I will say is that I have been sharing the LRTP engagement tools with some people lately because my friends know to ask me if they have something to complain about on the roads. And so I've been sending them that, the issue map. And I just wanted to give that issue map a quick shout out in this meeting. If anybody has problems or their friends come to them with problems, you can direct people to that issue map. It's a LRTP engagement page. Engage.NVA, that's what it was. Right.
/LRTP.
Yes, it's a really cool map, and you can also scroll around and see the other issues that people have put down, and you can give them a thumbs up. So I just want to give that tool a shout out because I think it's really cool, and I've been using it lately.
Near miss.
Yes, near miss as well. Yes, which is very interesting. All right. Thank you, everybody, very much for your time. Great conversation. And did you have a member comment you wanted to add?
Next meeting.
Next meeting, I don't have that information, but I assume that will be disseminated in usual ways. Yeah.
I would like to shout out about Kristen made a presentation in my community in Ashland, did an excellent job and was very informative and did share the incident map. And I had an opportunity to sort of point to the fact that it is so specific. You could go to your street and make a comment about your street, which is a powerful tool that would just need to blast everybody out about that, because that's the only way planners will know in totality what's going on in our community. So Kristen, thank you for making that presentation.
Thank you, everybody, so much for your time.